Welcome back to the monthly edition of the PigX podcast. I'm your host, Delaney Howell. In today's episode, we're going to look into a study that analyzed more than 230 necropsies to uncover key insights into sow mortality. We'll explore what specific conditions were identified, how seasonal trends played a role, and what producers should be watching for on their farms. The goal of this project was to gain a better understanding of why these losses occur and how diagnostic labs are being used to find answers. Joining us today is Laura Solis, a graduate student at Iowa State University, along with two familiar voices to the PigX podcast, Dr. Chris Rademacher, a clinical professor and the associate director of the Iowa Pork Industry Center, and Dr. Marcelo Almeida, assistant professor in the College of Veterinary Medicine, both from Iowa State University.
I am Laura Solis. I earned my veterinary degree in Mexico at La Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. After graduating, I had the opportunity to come to the United States and start working in swine production. Last year, I decided to come back to school to pursue a master's degree at Iowa State University under the supervision of Dr. Marcelo Almeida.
So what we're going to talk about today is just some exploratory work in looking at sow mortality. That's certainly been one of the focus areas of the Pig Livability Grant, and certainly of some of the past PigX podcasts that you have listened to. So one of the areas when we did some of the original research was looking at applied solutions, so things we could do on farm. One of the things that we found in the original survivability grant was looking at identifying sows that were at risk. And we really did that by identifying sows that weren't getting up and eating when we fed them first thing in the morning. So we flagged them, and then the caretakers went about their day, and then they came back and made sure that they got a proper examination and then treated according to the veterinarian's treatment protocol. And what we really saw with that and have continued to see results from that have been a nice reduction in sow mortality, usually 2 to 3 percentage points reduction at least in farms and systems that have implemented that procedure. And I think the biggest thing is it's really nothing new or novel. It's just making sure that sows get looked at and evaluated and they get treated every day, because we know sometimes, particularly when labor is a little bit short, it's easy for that one to fall to the bottom of the list and maybe not get done every day. So this is just really putting a renewed emphasis on making sure that we're looking at and evaluating sows every day and getting them treated, and really using the fact that sows that only eat every 24 hours, when they get up, they're usually really hungry, right? So they bounce right up and ready to go. If you notice a sow that's not bouncing up with all the rest of her, pen mates or stall mates, that should be a flag that something's wrong, and you need to come back and look at that later. So we did the original project on a 4,000 sow farm, and saw about a 4.5% reduction in mortality over a 26-week period when we compared the results before and after the training. And then that system had implemented that on the remainder of their farms and saw about a 3 to 3.5% reduction across their system for the next year. And when they did that, they actually looked at their mortality in 3 buckets. They looked at sow mortality either as pelvic organ prolapses, which was about a third of the mortality, lameness, which represented about another third of the mortality, and then the remaining third of the mortality was kind of lumped into this bucket, which was called sudden deaths. And really, sudden deaths, to really generalize it or make it super easy, was everything that wasn't a prolapse or wasn't a lame sow. And what we saw was, with the implementation of that protocol, was a nice reduction in lameness and a nice reduction in pelvic organ prolapse. But what we saw with the sudden deaths is that number didn't really move much at all. So in talking with the system, we felt like, hey, we needed to understand a little bit better what's all involved in this sudden death bucket of mortality. So as a veterinarian, the only way I really knew to approach that was really to start doing some necropsies and start to do that in a systematic manner. So we worked with the farm. We went out and did a few necropsies. Part of it was just to see could we determine more often than not, the cause of death just simply by looking at the gross lesions, by opening up the sows and putting together kind of a form that we could record the data and then develop some training tools around that as well. So we did a little bit of exploratory work there, and it kind of looked promising, but we knew this was something that was going to take somebody really solely dedicated to looking at this, and we wanted to do it on a farm or on a set of a couple of farms for an extended period. We wanted to do it over a year's time period. So we were very fortunate to have Laura join our group, and Laura's just recently finished up about a year's worth of data on 2 farms, systematically going through, and every sudden death that died, she went in that she had the opportunity to and do necropsies on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Laura, and Laura's going to talk about what she kind of found on those 2 farms over this past year.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, thank you for this invitation. And yes, I had the opportunity to join the Pig Survivability Project in September of last year. And since then, we have been working closely with 2 commercial sow farms in the Midwest US. And it's been a great learning experience connecting what we've seen in the postmortem room with what's happening in production records. So, as we know, right now, the sow mortality continues to be a big concern in our industry, like reaching nearly the highest mortality rate in 2023, with the new data showing up a couple days ago about dropping a little bit, but it's still being a big concern for the swine industry. But it's more concerning, like you mentioned, Chris, like the unknown cases. And so these show that accurate diagnosis is still a weak spot on many farms. So yeah, like basically the goals project, knowing exactly why sows are dying, was one of the main motivators for our project. So by performing systematic necropsies and documenting consistent data, we are trying to transform those unknown dates in valuable knowledge. So at this point, we have completed around 236 necropsies from the 2 commercial sow farms here in the Midwest. And as I mentioned, it has truly been a great experience, and I can say it's a very good beginning. And this project is means to help producers understand why necropsies matter, why they can learn from them, and how this information can make a real difference on their farms. So, of course, it's not an easy work. Sometimes it's heavy, messy, and not exactly glamorous, but it's mindful, because behind every necropsy, there's an animal. And every time, for example, I perform a necropsy, I try to collect as much as I can information as possible to tell the story of her productive life of that sow.
Okay, Laura, what were some of the things that you found? So you did all those necropsies. What were maybe some of the top 3 or 4 reasons that you found these unknown deads? What were some of the findings that you found?
Yeah, sure, Chris. At the moment, well, with these 236 necropsies that we have done, most of the deaths occur around farrowing, especially in the first week postpartum. The leading causes were retained piglets, gastric disorders, such as acute ulcers, perforated stomach ulcers, and cardiovascular failure. In case of younger sows, such as gilts, P1s, and P2, represented about half of all deaths, which highlights the importance of gilt development. And in the other hand, in older sows tended to die besides the retained piglet death reason from splenic or intestinal disorders. So, and also we found that 81% of all these necropsies had some degree of stomach ulceration. In many of these cases, the ulcers were secondary findings. I wanted to highlight these. So, not the direct cause of death. However, this can suggest the stress and feed disruption may increase the risk of affecting the no glandular portion of the stomach, contributing to these ulcerative changes. We also have some other secondary findings in other organs, in addition to the primary causes of death. So we also documented several secondary growth findings in other organs. For example, in the spleen, we have often observed cases of enlargement or contraction. Other organ that was observed with secondary findings was the liver. We frequently see a pale coloration suggesting anemia or poor oxygenation. And in the histopathology confirmed this, showing signs of cellular hypoxia. So yeah, sometimes with the support of the laboratory, we can just have a very accurate or close to accurate death reason.
So yeah, Laura, it sounds like for most of these you had a form and you had a manual that you kind of went by and helped develop for training purposes that you could identify the cause of death just by, observing the lesions that you found when you did the necropsies. But it sounds like in some cases you weren't quite sure, so you were able to take tissues and then send them on to the diagnostic laboratory. So in those cases, we're fortunate enough to have Dr. Marcelo Almeida join us, and maybe Marcelo, you can give us a little bit of description of on some of those cases where we weren't quite sure what we were seeing. What were some of the things that you found most frequently in the ones that weren't maybe obvious upon gross necropsy?
Yeah, Chris, that's like a great question. Like you said, Laura was able to identify most of the causes by just performing the gross necropsy, but she was unsure, she collected a standardized sample set that we had agreed upon before starting this project to send to the lab, right? So, because there were no obvious lesions, she would collect the lung, lymph nodes, heart, spleen, liver, kidney, small intestines, colon, urinary bladder, uterus. So basically, almost every tissue, so we could take a comprehensive look to understand what was possibly going wrong. From those cases, which were not that many, Laura mentioned she did over 200 necropsies, and we have about a little over 20, almost 30 cases that she was not able to identify a cause. And from those, there were the causes that we were able to identify at the lab were pretty diverse. The most often cause that we identified at the lab was actually a systemic bacterial infection, and the root cause for that could have been different things, right? So in a few instances, it was due to retained pigs that Laura was able to identify during the gross necropsy, or perhaps a neurogenital infection, either like in the kidneys or in the urinary bladder, a uterine infection not directly related to retained pigs. And in one instance, Laura found a vegetative valvular endocarditis, right? So all of those causes grouped under systemic bacterial infection made the bulk of what we found at the lab. And then other things that we found but were not as important, like Laura mentioned, the gastric ulcers that we were able to confirm those lesions of hypoxia in different tissues when Laura wasn't sure if that was truly the cause of death, but we were able to confirm histologically those findings. And then we have heart failure due to very severe pleuritis, epicarditis, and pericarditis. We also had a few cases where we were able to confirm the lesions in the spleen when there was like a splenic torsion and or rupture. And more recently, we have found actually two cases where tumors were found, right? One, we had like a lymphoma, and another one, there was a hemangiosarcoma in the spleen of one of the sows, which is not a very common finding in pigs, but eventually you may find this especially in older sows, right? So in fact, there were only from all of those necropsies that Laura sent us here at the lab, there were only two that were not able to determine the cause. So by associating the gross necropsy and then also submitting tissues to the lab, we are pretty much able to get most of the causes, probably 95% of assign a cause of death for over 95% of those sows that are dying suddenly at the farm.
It's a nice breakdown, and And like I say, that's the promising thing about this is Laura's done a really nice job of helping to develop a manual and a recording sheet, to help producers if they're interested in, taking this and applying this, working with their veterinarian, applying this, onto their farms if that's something they're interested in. We've got all those materials ready for you at piglivability.org, certainly to be able to go ahead and utilize that information. And like you say, like Laura said, it sounds like a lot of it you were able to find just from the gross necropsy findings. But yeah, it's certainly great to have some of that diagnostic backup as well for some of those ones where we weren't quite sure. Laura, I wanted to circle back a little bit. So I think the one that you said was most common was retained pigs, and I've seen some of your data, and I think you said about uh, 35 to 40% of them were retained pigs. That was a little bit of a surprising finding. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, I believe that it's something that in the farm, when you are able to read the card of the animal, and also another very good is to listen the farm staff what is telling you a little bit about the history of that animal. You can start think about what is happening, and also it's very important to emphasize that they already know exactly a little bit what is the death cause of that animal. But even that, when you have the opportunity to perform the necropsy, you can find some patterns. In this case, like the retained piglets, we have seen like there are some issues with probably the use of the oxytocin when we can have several piglets stuck in the cervix. And in other cases, we have seen piglets, there are not too many, just distributed in the horns. And the how is the state of these piglets, if they are decomposed or not? It's very different. For example, in the first 3 days after they farrow and they die by retained piglets, usually we can see some piglets that are not in bad conditions. And in the other hand, when they have several days after they farrow, these piglets are decomposed, and there are not too many remain in the uterus.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I think on some of them you were actually counting the numbers. So in most cases, was it just like one pig at the end of farrowing, or did you find lots of pigs in there? What did you find when you found the retained pigs?
Yeah, at this moment, we were able to record some of the cases of the retained piglets, around the 46% of all the cases. So, in average, we found that 5 piglets remains on the uterus. So the minimum was 1 piglet, but also we found 19 piglets in the uterus. So that is a huge difference. And just to trying to understand each case, it's like what I was telling you, like trying to link what happened, if it was by an oxytocin or it was for farrowing management, what's happened with that sow was retained piglets at the end.
Interesting. And did you find a pattern there? Were they young sows, old sows, or did you find them in kind of all parity categories?
That's interesting. I think well, we have seen that in older sows, parity 4, older, they're starting to have more issues on retained piglets, and also with the data that with this, how is the sow mortality and parity segregation. Parity 4 and older, besides the retained piglets, so it could be like something to investigate more what is happening. Is it something about management, or it's a uterus fatigue? So yeah, there are a lot of questions around that.
Yeah, that was really surprising. I figured there'd be some. I was surprised that that was the most common cause that you found. So I know you kind of looked at it over a year, and one of the objectives was to look at to see if there were any seasonality differences. Were you able to see some seasonal differences, some that were more prevalent during certain seasons, and then it changed depending on the season as to what was the most common reason?
Yeah, well, after working for a full year in one of the farms, we have the opportunity to perform the necropsies consistently through all seasons, and that continued to allow us to capture a much more complete picture. not just isolated cases. So how mortality patterns change over time and across different stages of production. So in this farm, we observe a clear seasonal trend, like retained piglets were more frequent during the cold months, while during the summer, particularly July, August, and September, we saw a peak in gastric disorders as a cause of death, mainly acute and perforated stomach ulcers. So these seasonal shifts may be related to environmental factors such as temperature changes, feed intake variation, or heat stress, which could be influencing the physiology and health of the sows.
Did you see any parity differences? Did any of those reasons change seasonally, or did they stay pretty consistent within the young parities versus the old parities when you compared the different seasons?
Yes, we saw that here the young animals had most frequent death reason by gastric disorders. So it could be related by parity. In this case, well, the acclimatization of these animals, there were most of the cases were gilts and parity one that die by gastric disorders. So yes, that could be influenced like the acclimatization of these animals to arrive to the farm and how is the management. And it's important like these animals, are they eating at giving the time to adapt to the new environment, to the new routine, to the new system. So that stress could be still for longer, and that could be a dead reason. Usually, we have seen like after they arrive, they were dying by between 15-21 days after their arrival to the farm.
I was wondering during the summer months, did you see any more heat during when it got warm? Did you see any more that you would have attributed to maybe heat stress related deaths during that time period?
Yes, well, another death cause that we have seen more often here in the summer months, it was cardiovascular failure, and that's something that we also support with the laboratory when we have a case. And usually in the cardiovascular failure cases, we cannot see too many gross findings, so we have to submit the samples to the lab to confirm is it a cardiovascular failure case.
Yeah, and Marcelo, are there some things that are representative, that the lab can help us determine on those cardiovascular that they would have been attributed to heat stress related cardiovascular failure?
Yeah, a lot of the times that's like you gotta start with an exclusion diagnosis, right? Like they don't have anything else, and then some of the you have to combine some of the things that are observed in the gross necropsy with some of the lab findings. So some of the findings that you may see grossly are ascites, right? So fluid in the abdominal cavity. You may also find that fluid also in the thoracic cavity. In some cases, that may be secondary to a severe epicarditis or pericarditis. But during the summer months, what we would see more often is no gross lesions at all besides ascites and then fluid in the thoracic cavity. And then histologically, what we are going to see is some edema, and we see the enlargement of the left ventricle compared to the right ventricle, which sometimes you can also observe that grossly, right? The normal ratio would be the left ventricle should be around 2 to 3 times the thickness of the right ventricle. And we had a case here recently that Laura brought to the lab where the left ventricle is about 6 times as thick as the right ventricle, and we are able to observe some of the swelling of the cardiomyocytes and things of that sort. But you start by making sure that nothing else is present. So it's both by an exclusion diagnosis and also these other findings that you'd see grossly and histologically.
Well, Laura, Marcelo, thank you for all that very interesting information. Um, For more information, I know Laura has presented some information several times at some meetings. That information will also be posted on the piglivability.org website. And Laura is also going to present some of the information at the International Pig Livability Conference coming up here in November as well. So there'll be more opportunity to get some of that information if you have some additional interest, or if you want to get a hold of Laura. Certainly contact us at the Iowa Pork Industry Center, and we'll put you in touch with Laura. Laura, Marcelo, is there anything else that you wanted to share with our listeners?
Well, for me, I think all these projects has been a truly team effort, and it's important. Like we always have the support for when we are performing necropsies to have a veterinarian next to us, and in this case, well, I have a Dr. Marcelo with all his advice. When every time that I have questions about a case, and I collect the samples and bring some of the organs or tissues back to the lab. So yes, it's something like collaboration is key to transforming necropsies into useful real-time tools for health improvement.
Yeah, I think a few key lessons there, Chris, is we gotta start opening more sows, right? Because a lot of these causes that Laura is finding in these farms may not be the same for other farms or systems, but a lot of those, there are actions that could be taken to actually decrease the frequency of those causes, right? So I think start opening more sources so we can get more data. It's important. And then I just want to emphasize what Laura said there. Maybe call your preferred or your diagnostician friend at the lab and talk to about like what potential samples you could collect from sows that you cannot find the cause, to help you determine what may be happening with those true sudden death sows.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, certainly from both of you two. We certainly appreciated all the effort from our partners. Obviously, none of this could get done without our friends at the National Pork Board and the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research to help sponsor this project, so that we could get all these learnings out, share them in all these different formats. Once again, this information and other key learnings from the pig survivability grant is located on the website, www.piglivability.org. And certainly appreciate you guys' willingness to come on today and share all this information with us.
So much great information in today's episode, and even more to come at this year's International Conference on Pig Livability happening in just a few days. I'll be there, as well as many of our great past speakers, but you can also catch up on highlights from previous conferences and see what's new this year by visiting piglivability.org. A special thanks to our guests, Laura Solis, Dr. Chris Rademacher, and Dr. Marcelo Almeida for joining us on today's episode. This episode was packed with valuable insights, and we appreciate all of you tuning in till the end. Be sure to join us next month for another timely conversation on all things swine and a quick look back at the Pig Livability Conference. Until then, I'm Delaney Howell, and this has been the PigX Podcast.
PigX is a national podcast hosted by the Pig Livability Project partners at Iowa State University, Kansas State University, and Purdue, and supported by the Iowa Pork Industry Center. For more information on the project, head to www.piglivability.org, or to inquire directly with questions regarding the project, email ipic.iastate.edu. PigX, ideas in the swine industry worth sharing.